But how do you reconcile the fact that to make it work for China, it seems to be based on a high level of repression, environmental destruction, censorship, a certain ideological stubbornness?
大家好，我是老吴。这一期我们又来聊聊马凯硕先生的一些观点。老朋友应该知道，我经常在节目里分享他的演讲和访谈，原因很简单，他的分析很有深度，观点也经常让人耳目一新。不过正因为他常常讲出跟西方主流不同的看法，特别是在谈到中国的时候，所以很多人会给他贴标签，说他亲中，甚至认为他在替中国说好话。但其实只要你稍微了解他，就会发现并不是这样。他自己也常说，他在美国生活过很多年，对美国很有感情，而且他从来没有在中国定居过。他说的那些话，很多时候只是出于对事实的观察，但就因为这些观察和主流叙事不同，就被一些人误解成亲中了。我之所以愿意分享他的观点，是因为中国在国际舆论场上长期受到很多抹黑和误解，而马凯硕的身影正好提供了一种平衡。他不是在为谁辩护，而是在提供另一种观察和思考的角度。今天要跟大家分享的就是一个很典型的例子。在一场论坛上，几位西方人士接连向他提了一些带有强烈偏见针对中国的尖锐问题，似乎就是想让他承认中国有多不好，但他又是怎么用他的智慧和语言来回击这些质疑的？接下来我们就一起来看看这场精彩的交锋。
Professor, you said a lot of wonderful things about China, and surely they're doing a lot of things right. But how do you reconcile the fact that to make it work for China, it seems to be based on a high level of repression, environmental destruction, censorship, a certain ideological stubbornness? I mean, we've spoken about Hong Kong, the Uyghurs. How do you reconcile that, and why do you think that's? I mean, do you think that's tolerable?
Thank you. I'm really glad you asked that question because your question captured very well the Anglo-Saxon media's perception of China. And I would suggest to you very bluntly that it's a distorted perspective of reality. Let's take the first word you use, repression. If the Communist Party of China only relied on repression to stay in power, it would not create the most dynamic economy in the world, right? It is by far the most dynamic economy in the world. It has delivered the fastest growing economy for 30 years. And it has done this by educating the Chinese people to a level and extent that the Chinese people have never been educated ever before. And you say it's repression? You obviously are taking the old Cold War mindset. I was in Moscow in 1976, and I saw repression in Moscow. And when I was in Moscow, the Soviet citizens were not allowed to travel outside the Soviet Union. That's repression. In the year 2019, 139 million Chinese left China freely. Guess what? Zero defectors. 139 million Chinese, right? That's twice the population of the UK. Went back to China. So all your description, when you say environmental degradation, China's climate change policies are far more responsible than those of the United States, which has not once, but twice withdrawn from global environmental protocols. Kyoto Protocol, the Bush administration left 8 years. Paris Accords, Trump administration left 4 years. And you know what? The reason why we're having climate change today is not because of new flows of greenhouse gas emissions from China and India. It's because of what the Western countries have put in the atmosphere since the Western Industrial Revolution. Get the data. The single largest contributor, cumulatively, right, is number 1, United States, number 2, Europe, number 3, China. Right? And the West wants China to pay an economic price for the current flows, but the West doesn't want to pay an economic price for what it put in the atmosphere. You want to deprive the Indians of electricity when the United States could just, by the way, if the United States could impose $1 a gallon tax, that would save the world. Cut down gasoline consumption, raise money for investment in green technology. Simple solutions. And by contrast, the largest reforestation program in the world is carried out by China. It has already reforested an area the size of Belgium or bigger, right? So all your descriptions capture the natural distortions of China that you get in the Anglo-Saxon media, which violate the rules of the Enlightenment, which say that you must be rational, calm, and objective, especially in understanding your adversary. And if the Chinese were as stupid and as incompetent as you describe them to be, don't worry about them. But I can assure you, you are now dealing with a far more intelligent and rational actor that doesn't fit any of the Anglo-Saxon categories that you applied to them. Please forgive my bluntness.
I have a follow-up question from the earlier speaker. You mentioned that we should be more objective when it comes to China, and that and see also their achievements. But my question would be, if the Chinese population sees those achievements and appreciates them, why do they still need censorship then? They shouldn't need it if all the the whole of the population sees those achievements. That's a contradiction to me. And second of all, could you elaborate on Taiwan? Why do you think China would accept the status quo? Why do you think China would say, well, this is fine, we can live with it as long as everybody plays along? Or don't you think that China at some point will just say, we want Taiwan back and we want it our way and we just don't accept it like it is at the moment? Thanks.
Okay. The thing about your question on censorship is that it tries to sort of say, more or less, excuse me, that in the West we have no censorship, that's white. China, which has censorship, is black, okay? And I would say that in most societies are shades of gray. You have no formal censorship in Western societies. Believe me, you have informal censorship, right? And in the United States today, by the way, it goes down to political correctness. And even in the greatest universities, right, in the US today, and I'm told by graduates of these great universities, I just was there, that the political culture is pushing towards political correctness, and there's no formal censorship, but there's so many things you just cannot say anymore. And if you want an example of this, read the Financial Times this weekend, lunch with FTs with a Yale professor, Amy Chua. She spoke freely. See what happened to her. That's also censorship, okay? So there are different kinds of censorship. There are the blatant kind of censorship you can see, and the not so blatant kind. So the only point I want to tell you about Chinese society is this, which is, I think this is the one reality that almost nobody can understand, which is that most of the Chinese people have never been happier. It's amazing. You have to live there to see it. And in my book, I cite one of America's greatest strategic thinkers, George Kennan. And he says at the end of the day, the outcome of the contest between the United States and Soviet Union, the old Cold War, would depend on which society enjoys greater spiritual vitality. Where are the people happier, especially the bottom 50%? And today, this is a reality that you just find it difficult to accept, but it is real. The bottom 50% in America are about to vote Trump back in 2024. Trump is coming back, right? The danger of Trump coming back is so real, and I can tell you that shows you what a difficult, divided, dysfunctional society the United States has become, that they can vote Trump back. That's unhappiness surfacing. In China, by contrast, the people till today are still amazed at how much their lives have improved and are happy with the situation that they have down there. Which is why, to be honest, with apologies to you, I reacted very strongly to the word repression, because the Chinese people actually understand and appreciate how much they have advanced. And the Chinese actually now, the people actually, and this is something that I met someone who was here a few days ago who speaks Chinese fluently, has been there recently. And he said in China there used to be a natural awe and respect for the West, which was good. But that awe and respect for the West is diminishing as they see what is happening in Western societies, especially the United States, and they see what's happening in China. So I want you all to understand that don't use black and white categories to understand China and the West. Understand the strengths of the West, the weaknesses of the West, understand the strengths of China, weaknesses of China, and then make a comparison. Don't do black and white comparisons. And on Taiwan, basically, just my simple answer is, if you don't shake the status quo, we can keep peace. No, but the Chinese are not going to go out and launch a military war. Because again, I discussed this in my book, the Chinese believe that the best way to win a war is without fighting. If you have to fight, it means you're not a good general.
My name is Christian Echle. I'm the director of the Political Dialogue Asia of Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and I'm very glad that I'm still able to pose this question, because Professor Mahbubani, you basically said on a platform of the media program of Konrad Adenauer Foundation that censorship helps to keep the population happy, which is quite a statement for the media program of Konrad Adenauer Foundation. And I would argue against that. I don't believe that. I believe that censorship is maybe in order for a majority of the people, but if you think about the minorities, if you think about the Uyghurs, if you think about the Me Too activists, they suffer from censorship. That's the one side. The other side is that censorship also prevents a very important function of the media, which is to help accountability, to make sure that the government is accountable. So my question to you is, if you say the censorship is fine, where does accountability come from for the Chinese government, for Xi Jinping and his government? Because at least I believe that this is a very important mechanism in a country, that there's accountability for the government. Maybe you don't think that's true, but I'm really interested in your perspective on that.
You know, one thing I love about the English language is its precision. So when I said that censorship has not prevented the Chinese people from becoming happy, it doesn't mean that censorship has made the Chinese people happy. These are two very different statements, okay? It is true that there is censorship in China. It's also true that there's a lot of happiness in China. That's the reality that I'm describing. Now, I would prefer, like you, to live in a society without censorship, certainly. But that's a choice you want, that's a choice I want. Let the Chinese people choose what they want. And when you ask for accountability, I suggest you look at 4,000 years of Chinese history. When the emperor fails, right? He loses the mandate of heaven, and in one way or another, the Chinese people have overthrown bad emperors for 4,000 years, right? They've suffered from time to time, which is true. And if you look at the cycles of Chinese civilization, all I'm saying is, you want to understand China, why don't you look at Chinese history, okay? Now, the Chinese go through cycles, right? When they have bad years, they have 200 bad years. Guess what? The Chinese have just had almost 200 bad years. Now the Chinese are beginning 200 good years, of which 40 years have just happened. And whether or not there's censorship or no censorship, another 160 good years are coming. That's the reality. I'm not saying I approve of it. I'm saying censorship is not going to make a difference, right? Because the Chinese have evolved their own social and political contract. You may not like it, I may not like it, but they seem to like it. And I want to emphasize a key point. It's a bit arrogant for Westerners to tell the Chinese people, we know better than you do what is good for you. And in this book, I cite an American ambassador, Chas Freeman. He says, we in the West don't understand that China suffers a ratio of people to arable land which is among the tightest in the world. If the United States had the same ratio of people to arable land as China does, United States wouldn't have 330 million people. United States would have 4 billion people. And Chas Freeman says, if we in America, if we had 4 billion people, we would accept far more controls and restrictions than we do today, because when you're crowded, living together, you accept a social contract which is much tighter and more disciplined than Americans will accept. So I'm not suggesting we should become like the Chinese. I agree with Stefan, right? We should look after ourselves. We should create our own societies. China is not asking us to transform ourselves. All that China is saying is, our society is good for ourselves. You keep your society, and we live and work with each other. I think that's a perfectly reasonable statement.
好，刚才这段精彩的交锋我们就看到这里。面对西方常见的对华质疑和偏见，马凯硕还是展现了他一贯的犀利风格。他用充分的事实和逻辑，给出非常有力、非常直接的回应。他谈到中国的现实，比如经济的活力、人民生活的改善，还有在环保等方面的努力，来反驳那些过于简单化甚至扭曲的描述。就像我们一开始说的，马凯硕并不是刻意在为中国说好话，他只是提供一种基于事实、独立思考的角度，一种不同于西方主流的视角。在这个话语权主要被西方掌握的时代，能听到像马凯硕这样敢于挑战主流叙事，提出不同观点的声音，我觉得是非常难得的。好，今天的内容就到这里，感谢大家收看，我们下次见。